Hello, my name is Daylight. I'm your host and you're watching Birth Talks. My guest today is Maddy Oden, childbirth activist, a doula, and founder of the Tasha Oden French Memorial Foundation. Before we begin, I would like to let our viewers know that content on today's show might be disturbing to some of our viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The United States is the most dangerous, affluent country in which to give birth. According to ProPublica, NPR's groundbreaking Lost Mothers series, between 700 and 900 women die each year in the U.S. from causes related to pregnancy or childbirth, and the rate has risen, even as it has declined in other wealthy countries. Yet these deaths of women from causes related to pregnancy or childbirth are almost invisible. When a new or expectant mother dies, her obituary rarely mentions the circumstances. Her identity is shrouded by medical institutions, regulators, and state maternal mortality review committees. Her loved ones mourn her loss in private. The lessons to be learned from her death are often lost as well. Reports show that Black women fare worse in pregnancy and childbirth, dying at a rate more than triple that of white mothers. Why has the U.S. fallen behind other countries, and why are we failing our mothers? To share more with us on this topic, I'm honored to welcome Maddy Oden into the studio. Maddy has been at the forefront of raising awareness about ways to provide women with the most positive birth experience. Having been through the tragedy of losing her daughter and granddaughter at childbirth, she has channeled her energy to improve childbirth. Welcome, Maddy.
Thank you, Daylight.
So
Good
glad
to
to
be
have you.
Thank you.
Can you tell us your story?
Okay. It was December 27th, 2001. And my daughter, Tasha Oden French, was 10 weeks past her due date, and her OBGYN had been pressuring her to be induced. And she didn't want to be induced. She wanted a natural childbirth. She didn't want any interventions or anything. And so she kept putting them off. She would go in for the stress tests, and all the stress tests were fine, and nothing was wrong with her, nothing was wrong with the baby. But finally, when she was 10 days past her date, she did agree to go in there, but she also snuck in sandwiches and drinks and did all these things that they, at that time, weren't letting you do when you were in labor. And they were putting a lot of pressure on her, you know, to be induced, and she kept putting them off, and they actually were really nasty to her. And at that time, I didn't know 1/9 of what I know now, and had 3 babies, no drugs or nothing, just in the hospital by myself. And so I was not really clear what was going on. However, it's really strange when you, in retrospect, when you look at those type of situations, God puts you in a strange mindset when I think He's about to bring something on you that you weren't expecting. And so usually I was pretty quick to pick up on those things, but I really was not understanding why they were pressuring her like that. And so I asked her, I said, well, what's the problem? Don't you trust your doctor? Because the doctor kept saying induce, induce, induce. And she said, oh, no, I trust my doctor implicitly. And I go, well, what's wrong? And she says, I just don't like their attitude. And,
oh my goodness.
And finally, you know, the one white nurse came in and she said, well, you don't want to go home with a dead baby, do you? And so I looked at her like, I know you didn't go there, you know, and I didn't say anything though. And my daughter just kind of looked at her, and so they told her, the nurse, to go away. And so her and her husband discussed it, and finally they decided they would be they would be induced. Excuse me. And so she said, go home, you know, don't call us, we'll call you. And I had asked the lady when my daughter said, you know, that she would be induced, what they were going to use. And they said Cytotec. And I said, well, what's that? Because I didn't understand. I had never heard of it. I mean, I knew Pitocin. That was about it, I think. Even at that time, I didn't know about Cervidil. And she said, well, it's perfectly safe. We use it all the time. That was the answer to my question, what is it? She didn't say it was prostaglandin. She didn't say it was vaginally inserted. She said it's perfectly safe. We use it all the time. And my daughter actually knew that it wasn't approved by the FDA, but she didn't know all of the side effects because they had talked about it in childbirth class. So for some reason, she decided, okay, that's what her doctor recommended. She trusted her doctor, so she went with that. And I have to backtrack for a minute. She had just finished her PhD. She was in medical school, and she was trying to decide on what discipline she was going to go into. And after all this pressure had been put on her, in L&D, she looks at me and she says, literally, the last thing she said was, maybe I'll be an OBGYN, literally. And I said, oh, okay, because I knew that meant that she would not be treating people the way she was being treated. Okay, so I go home, and my son had, that time he was living overseas, and he came home with his family. Actually, she was waiting on him to have the baby. So they were at my house, and I get this call about 3:30 in the morning. Actually, I had woken up before the call because I was just kind of, something didn't feel right. And my son-in-law said, come to the hospital. And I said, why? And he says, oh, they're going to do an emergency C-section. So the hospital in Oakland, I actually lived within 5 minutes from the hospital. So we drove over there right quick and had to go in through ER. And I just hit the button to go up to the floor, and the guard stops me. And he says, you can't go up there. And I said, no, you don't understand. They're going to do emergency C-section on my daughter in L&D, so I need to go up there. He said, no, we can go up there. And I looked at him like, what? Anyway, so I said, so call up there and talk to the nurse on duty because I need to get upstairs. So he called up there and whatever he told them. So they let me upstairs, and when I get upstairs, the whole place is like deserted. It's like an atomic bomb had hit the floor, and nobody was around, which is highly unusual in labor and delivery. So anyway, so I start walking around, and I notice in this one room, had a glass door. It was like a conference room or something, and all these people in white coats, nurses and doctors, they were all sitting around the table mumbling, but there was nobody on the floor. There was nobody at the nurse's station. This was ridiculous. So I just start going back to the last room I had seen my daughter in, and there was no bed in there. It was totally empty except for my son-in-law, who was a basket case. And yeah, and I said, where's Tasha? And he said, she's gone. And I said, gone where? And he said, she's gone. And then I realized what he was talking about. So I kind of fell to my knees. And anyway, when I picked myself up, I was walking around the hall to find her, right? And there ain't nobody there. And one more time, here comes somebody in a white coat, and they go, where are you going? And I said, I'm going to OR, because apparently that's where they had taken her to do the C-section. And he said, well, you can't go in there. And I said, look, I'm not going to tear up the room. I said, I got a lot of medical people in my family. I need to see my daughter. And so he let me in there. He let me in there, and she was in there, and the baby was in there, and she was still tubed, and the baby was tubed, and her eyes were open. So I closed her eyes, and I told my son, my other son actually had by that time come, and I think her father wasn't there. But anyways, it was me and my two other sons, and then a nurse came in, African-American nurse who was from somewhere outside of the country. And I told everybody we had to, say a prayer. So we all held hands and we said a prayer for her. And so then we left OR, and her doctor, the one that was going on the skiing trip, miraculously appears finally. And I asked her what happened. And she said, well, it's a very rare occurrence, but it does happen. And she didn't tell me what it was, not at that point, I didn't know. And the only thing I could think to say was, well, can you at least tell me I mean, she had ordered a drug that had just killed 2 people in 10 hours. And I said, can you at least tell me that you won't give this drug to anybody else? And she looks at me and she says, I can't tell you that. And I was just like, that was it. I was done. And so she didn't tell me. I mean, what had happened to her was she had an amniotic fluid embolism because the drug that they had gave her caused really violent contractions. And the amniotic fluid embolism killed her, and I guess the violent contractions killed my granddaughter. But I told her, well, when the coroner comes, make sure they stay in the same bag. Don't ask me why I said that. No idea. Other than that they had been together for 9 months, it just seemed ridiculous to separate them. So, and that was the way we buried them. They're both in the same place. Okay, so whatever amount of time went by, after they left, the coroner, then we left, and I remember it was raining, kind of like today was, and we went out through through ER, and the only thing I could remember was saying out loud, I heard myself say, this drug is going to go away. And then we went home and we, did all the things you have to do. And about, I don't know, maybe a year after that, I decided I was going to form the foundation, Tasha Oden French Memorial Foundation, that's educational and was going to deal with the issues of pregnancy and childbirth. And so if you go online and you look at the website, you'll see that it has a lot of information from a lot of really very natural, homeopathically, midwifery-oriented childbirth organizations on there. A lot of information about, of course, off-label use of drugs and cytotec or misoprostol and maternal mortality. The disparities in maternal mortality, which are horrendous, and a lot of information in places that you can go to get resources and referrals. Wow. And so what year is this, 2018? In 2017, last January, we had the first screening of our documentary, Tasha's Story, which basically tells, her experience, our experience, but specifically deals with the issues of informed consent, off-label use of drugs, and maternal mortality, specifically the disparities. And so we've been, showing that with panel discussions afterwards with really well-known midwives and educators in the field. Ina Mae Gaskins, Jenny Josephs is the midwife, Claudia Booker. We have a hearing coming up in D.C. On the Hill where we invited, I think, about 400 Congress and Senate staff people to support these 2 bills on maternal mortality that have been on the floor actually for over a year and haven't moved due to the present circumstances on the Hill. And we're also at that hearing, we have a lot of people. It's just a very interesting situation when with the internet and what it's the information that everybody is able to get if you can hit the return key, is pretty phenomenal. So while we were making the film, and even before that, I've just been contacted by a lot of husbands, mothers, women who have been given cytotec. Either their babies have died, their wives have died. When we were making the film, the woman that was producing it, Carmen Jones, she was contacted by a man in Mexico City whose wife was given cytotec to induce her labor, and she died, and the baby died.
So all these people just started coming forward, adding to the story. Wow.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And what you've gone through is it's enduring to see how strong you were, like your resilience to it. It's pretty impressive, but I did want to ask you one thing about the story you just said. You said that the doctor wanted to go on a skiing trip. She actually mentioned that to you guys?
My son-in-law found that out. I don't know. I wasn't really interested in dealing with her because that wouldn't have been a good outcome.
Right.
I was more interested in getting the drug out of what I call the toolbox of induction. So other people didn't have to go through that. Yeah, but he found that out. I don't know.
Wow.
He must have stalked her or something.
Stalked her a little bit.
I don't know.
So let me ask you this. Why does race and class have anything to do with the type of care that a pregnant mother might receive?
I'm glad you asked that. Why does it? Because this is America, and race has something to do with everything. Everybody carries around stereotypes and preconceived notions and ideas. Literally, you could say through their DNA, and it's not really through their DNA, it's through the culture of just this country, the way people are brought up and the things that are passed down from generation to generation, whether it's through a look or something literally that you say or the way that you react or whatever. And when it comes to the medical field and how people are treated, if you are a person of color, you are treated totally different. As soon as you walk into that medical office, immediately, with certainly most of all the medical professionals that I've met as a doula and individual, you're treated like you really are not going to be able to understand what's going on, so we're not going to explain nothing to you, and you don't take, a lot of questions or dumb down or whatever. You're just, over and over again, there's all kinds of stories. There's a Tuskegee experiment, there's Henrietta Lacks. I mean, thousands of stories like that happen over and over again. People are used as experiments. The whole way cytotech is used on anybody really is an experiment because it's an off-label drug. It's not supposed to be used in labor and delivery.
I'm glad that you brought up cytotech again, because I actually wanted to ask you, can you basically just tell us what is cytotech, what is it supposed to be used for versus how they actually use it?
Okay, well, it was created by drug company Cyril for ulcers. And so it's ulcers, yeah. It's one pill. Its drug name is misoprostol, but it's also called Cytotec or miso, or vitamin C. And it's not supposed to be scored, which means it's not supposed to be cut. You take the whole thing, swallow it with a glass of water. But in labor and delivery, because originally when they started using it in the U.S. in '99, they were giving women way too much, and there was like way too many horrendous effects, like ruptured uteruses and hemorrhages and deaths and everything.
Wow.
So they cut it in quarters, and if a quarter is given to me and a quarter is given to you, might react totally different because we get different amounts of the chemical because it's not supposed to be cut.
And no type of experimenting has even been done to measure that out.
No. Because in order to do a randomized, not even a randomized, but a legitimate NIH study, you have to have thousands and thousands and thousands of people in the study. It's a lot of paperwork, and they have to specifically designate all the side effects that could possibly happen. So when Cyril created the drug, it sent a letter to over 200,000 OBGYNs in the country, and it specifically said, do not give this to pregnant women. These are all things that happen. And it listed 12 things, including death of the mother, death of the child, uterine rupture, amniotic fluid embolism, fetal brachycardia, all of these insane hyperstimulation of the uterus. Anybody who read that would go, oh, okay, I'm not going to.
I'm never trying.
Yeah, and and as a woman in labor, in my opinion, informed consent means that they have to tell you all that stuff. Well, number one, they don't. Number two, if they did tell you, of course you wouldn't take it, so you wouldn't be following their orders, and that doesn't go over well in the medical profession.
Wow.
So, but in terms of race, African American women, women of color are just treated way different than white women. And the respect piece, like even with what they told my daughter, you don't want to go home with a dead baby, those kind of things. I mean, as a doula,
It's very patronizing comments.
it's very patronizing comments,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Now, is there any other drug other than cytotec that women should be aware of when they're giving birth, or is just cytotec, like if they say that,
No, pretty much everything.
everything?
I mean, some things, I mean, okay, so some of the things, like cytotec is inserted vaginally, okay, on the cervix. Once it's inserted, it's a done deal because it just dissolves with the heat of your body. You can't take it out, you can't dumb it down. Cervidil, which is also inserted, but it's like on a tampon, so you can pull it out, okay? Pitocin, it's an IV, you can turn it down. So you can do these different things. The balloon, even though, I mean, as painful as that thing is, I mean, you can pull that out also. So there are things that you can do, but unlike all those other things, cytotec is a done deal once it's given to you, even when you take it orally, which now they're experimenting with.
So from what you're saying, doctors and nurses, they're aware of all these risks. They're aware.
Well, you know, I honestly don't know. A lot of them are, a lot more are aware of them now than in 2001. And in fact, the month before my daughter died, there was a series on Dateline that did a 15-minute show on cytotec when used to induce labor, and they had on like 5 women, all of which who had either had uterine ruptures, or the babies had brain damage, or the babies died, but some horrific thing, and they were explaining what it felt like, you know, when they were given cytotec because the contractions were so horrendous. So, you know, if they watch that, they, you know, may believe it, may not believe it.
Right, but it's iffy. So how can a low income or even middle income woman, woman of color, any class really, how can they get a doula or a midwife? Like, how do they go about that process?
You just go online. You literally Google doulas and midwives in your area. There's lots of lists and groups. There's also organizations like, for me, I do births a lot through San Francisco Homeless Prenatal. So they'll refer clients to me, Alameda County Public Health. I mean, there's a lot of places where there are resources where you can find. I mean, the easiest one is online, which also has like
the internet saves us.
The internet is amazing.
Right. Okay, so how about I ask you, what are some examples of countries that have like a lower mortality rate and their mothers and infants basically are okay after their birth? Wealthy countries. I want to know about that.
So what I did was I went to World Health Organization, one of my favorites, and they just have stats. This is 2018. They have stats online now for 2015. So France had 66 maternal deaths and childbirth deaths in the year 2015.
Did you say 66?
66. Now you have to realize they have like, everybody has millions of babies, okay? Wow. England had 74, okay? The U.S. in the same year had 550. Now both England and France certainly have different medical systems than we do. In fact, one of the women who contacted me, Anne Lorette, she was given cytotec to induce her labor. And she went online, found my organization, blah, blah, blah. Her son had brain damage, and she almost died from hemorrhaging. She formed the same type of organization that I have in France. What they did, because France has its medical institution, is they put a lot of pressure on the health system and got the health system in the whole country of France to not use cytotec to induce labor. The same thing that we're trying to do, except we have a different medical system. In England, you know, England uses midwives, so they actually they do use cytotec. There are midwives that use cytotec, but they don't use it as much. And the midwifery model of care you know, focuses on homeopathic remedies, homeopathic inductions, and, you know, natural childbirth and labor, just like hands off, like sit down, go knit or drink a glass of water or something. We don't do that here. And then this one more.
Okay, go ahead.
This is one more. Okay, this is the UAE, which is United Arab Emirates. Country is about this big. It's 50, 60 years old maybe by now. Okay, they had 6 maternal deaths. 6 maternal deaths in 2015.
Wow, that's incredible. Why don't you talk to me real quick? Just give me 1 minute about the bills on the floor in Congress.
Okay.
Because I do want to hear about that, and I think our viewers at home really need to hear about that. They need to make sure they're calling their congressmen. So
yes, definitely.
Tell us about that.
Okay, there are 2 bills. The first one is H.R. 1318, which was put on the floor in 2017, and that is called Preventing Maternal Death Acts of 2017. The thing about this bill is that it directs HHS, Department of Health and Human Services, to establish a program that will make grants to states for the purpose of reviewing pregnancy-related deaths. Because a lot of states right now, they don't do that. They don't even clock in how many women die. So the statistic that I just gave of 550 is really off.
Maddy, I'm so sorry. I could talk to you about this forever, and I will.
Time's up.
Yeah, but I have to tell our viewers, make sure you go and you call your congressman about these bills. That is very important. Just want to thank you so much for coming on today. And if you guys want more about Maddy Oden, please go to tasha.org. That's TATIA.org. Okay, thank you. This was Birth Talks. And I'm so glad that you were here.
Thank you.
Appreciate you so much.
Appreciate coming.
Yeah.
See, I told you I was going to run.
Yeah.